Welcome everybody. I hope you can hear me. Please sort of nod at me if you can't do. A number of you are still joining us at the moment, but it's a real delight to welcome you to the start of our Sabeel-Kairos Cry for Hope series in Lent. And we hope that you're going to stay with us over the next 5 weeks to explore some of the really important themes that are going to come out of this Palestinian cry for hope. And my name's Charlotte Marshall. I'm one of the advocacy workers at Sabeel-Kairos, and I'm going to be your sort of host tonight. I'm going to start just with some housekeeping rules. The first of those is that you should have been muted on entry to this call. And please, can I ask you to stay on mute? It really helps, particularly when our speakers are doing their thing, for there not to be lots of background noise and distraction. And of course, the exception to this is that if you would like to ask a question during our question and answer session afterwards, then please do unmute yourself for that. Can I also ask that if you want to ask a question, that you use the raise your hand function that Zoom provides. If you're not familiar with that, it's usually found in the Zoom bar at the bottom of your screen under reactions, and perhaps take a couple of moments now and just after this, just to familiarize yourself with where that is. The reason I'm asking you to do that is, as you can see already, we've got a large number of people on this call. If you raise your hand, it will move you to the top of my screen so that I'll be able to see and call on you. And if you are asking a question, can I also ask that you keep it brief? I'm hoping we're going to have lots of questions, and it would be great to get through as many as possible. As you'll probably have heard, we are also recording this session. We won't be recording the Q&A, so please don't worry if you're concerned about remaining anonymous. That part, we will have stopped the recording by then, but we are recording now, and we will be recording our speakers so that there's lots of people who are going to engage with this, we hope, over the series, using it in Lent groups in the week, and these talks will be available on our YouTube channel. So without further ado, I think that's all the housekeeping done. If you have any questions during the event, not related to the Q&A, but any technical problems or any follow-up questions, please do pop them in the chat. Myself and Jenny, who's helping me to host today, we will do our best to help you out. I'm really delighted that we're kicking off our series looking at Cry for Hope with one of the authors of Cry for Hope itself. And what a better way to begin than hearing direct from a Palestinian pastor. So we're delighted that Reverend Dr. Munther Isaac is joining us from Bethlehem tonight. Reverend Munther, thank you. We know it's 2 hours later, so it's well into your Sunday evening already, but we're always delighted to have you as part of these events. And Reverend Munther, as many of you will know, is one of the authors of Cry for Hope. He is one of the founders of the Kairos Palestine movement. He has written several excellent books, which I can highly commend, and I'm hoping he will do so also. And he is also obviously a leading Palestinian theologian. So he's going to be talking to us about the Cry for Hope tonight. Joining him is Reverend David Haslam from the UK. David has decades of experience in campaigning and helping the church to move on issues of social justice, everything from climate change, South African apartheid, right through to Palestine today. And he's going to be bringing some of that perspective to our talk tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Reverend Munther, who is going to begin. As I say, please remain on mute. Munther and David will be taking the next 30 minutes between them before we come back to the Q&A. Thank you very much, Munther, and over to you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Good evening, friends. And it's so good to be with you, and thanks for turning up in such good numbers in this special season of Lent. And it is indeed my joy to be with you. I speak heavy-hearted, of course, because of everything that's happening in the world today, in Ukraine, in Yemen, and of course here in Palestine. My idea was to talk about Cry for Hope, but I kind of made a change of mind in the last minute, and I've just been, debating within myself what to speak about. I'm going to assume that you're all aware of the document itself, so I'm not going to go much to talk about it. I mean, the document, just to quickly emphasize, was a document, and let me maybe share some slides with you. written by a group of theologians, activists from the Kairos Palestine movement and the Global Kairos for Justice, which is a coalition of network individuals, churches, organizations around the world, more than 40 countries, who are passionate for justice in Palestine. So it's a document and collaborative work between Palestinians and internationals who are hoping and saying that this might be our last cry for hope, given what is really happening in our world, given what is really happening in our land today, the difficulty of the situation. The call built on the Kairos Palestine document, and the call emphasized that things are way beyond serious. If we are serious about peace in the Holy Land, we have to take action now. And it's really sad to see how things have developed or deteriorated since the writing of the Kairos Palestine in 2009, even since the writing of the Cry for Hope in 2020. Sadly to say, things are worse now. Israel has established a well-funded and the whole infrastructure for a system of controlling Palestinians, a system that many have called apartheid now, including Israeli Jewish human rights organizations and well-respected international human rights organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. The sad thing about the current reality is that the world is watching. Israel continues to create new realities, and it seems that the occupation and this system is here to stay. And ever since the nation state law passed, which emphasized that this is a Jewish state, which excludes the right for self-determination to all non-Jews in a very exclusive manner, Israel have been annexing, implementing, and making sure that we as Palestinians will stay in this reality. What I would like then to share with you this evening, you know, in our tradition, we had Ash Sunday on Wednesday, and this is a season of Lent, a season of repentance, but also to me, one of the key elements in my own thinking, my own theology, and the theology of many Palestinians is the whole idea of lament. And in this season of Lent, I would like to join you. I would like to ask you to join in a process of lamenting. Actually, one of the things that Cry for Hope calls is this kind of process. But I think we need to do more lamenting as churches, as Christians. And let me talk about what we need to lament and why we need to lament. I think we need to lament first and foremost the ongoing Nakba of the Palestinians. Nakba is not an event of the past. You know what I mean by Nakba, the catastrophe of Palestinians. That's, you know, we use Nakba to talk about the events of 1948, when we lost our land, our existence, our villages, our livelihood, when half of our population became refugees. Yet our Nakba continues. Our Nakba continues in Gaza, where almost 2 million Palestinians are besieged in the largest open-air prison in the world. Our Nakba continues in East Jerusalem, where Palestinians are, you know, continue to face and suffer and fight forced eviction. Let's call it what it is, ethnic cleansing from their homes, in a daily basis, to fight a systematic process to make Jerusalem, let's say, a Jewish city and not a diverse, inclusive city. And basically try to push all Palestinians out of Jerusalem. This is our ongoing reality. Our ongoing Nakba continues in the fact that the refugees who were expelled from their homes in 1948 have still did not return. And we're still fighting just to emphasize the right to return. Not everybody acknowledges that. Our Nakba continues in the ongoing occupation, military occupation and control of the West Bank, and the building of settlements, the destruction of homes and confiscation of lands, and the restriction of movement within the West Bank. Our Nakba continues as Palestinians in denying our right for self-determination. So we need to lament that. Second, we need to lament the silence of the world. I think it continues to be shocking to me whenever I think of it. I think, you know, the world seems at peace with what's happening. They no longer care, as if they cared in the past. You know, in the past, they convinced us they cared. Maybe they did some work, but now, you know, Israel can do what it wants because nobody holds Israel accountable. The silence of the world, but also the silence of the church. And when I talk about the silence of the church, I'm not just talking about radical Christian Zionist groups who support Israel. We know they exist. We know they are a problem. Yes, we lament that. It breaks my heart to see Christians supporting settlements, Christians supporting the Israeli military. It breaks my heart to see or to know about the billions of dollars. I hope you heard me correct, not millions, but billions of dollars. But it also breaks my heart to see us struggling to convince churches to call things by their name. We cry to churches, and the Cry for Hope mentions this, that the situation in Palestine is a situation of apartheid. Don't take our word, take the international word, take the international law, the international organizations, the Jewish activists, South African leaders themselves. But churches continue to tell us that's not the right word. They're more concerned about the language than they are about our reality. They're more concerned about, you know, maintaining the status quo and the relationship in the Christian-Jewish dialogue than they are with our own suffering and situation. You know, we're struggling to push churches to make strong statements, not even let alone actions when it comes to our land. Churches can be good in statements, by the way. We pray for peace. We still maintain our position about two states. I mean, what are you talking about? Israel has taken all of the land and you're still talking about pray for peace and the two states. So I lament in this season, not just the silence of the world, but also the silence of the church. And as I said, I lament the role theology played in this. I speak to sisters and brothers in the UK, and you are all well aware of the role of theology during the British Mandate in the infamous Balfour Declaration, and the role theology continues to play today, whether in silencing us as Palestinian Christians, whether in advancing the idea that the current state of Israel is a sign of God's faithfulness, is a divine act, is needed, and is a fulfillment of prophecy, I mean, and so on. I lament the fact that churches continue to promote a theology that silences us as Palestinians and ignores us, even dehumanizes us. And Cry for Hope also talks about this, also talks about the need to churches to revisit their theology. And finally, in this season, I lament, I wanted to say the double standards of the world, but let's call it what it is. Let's use a biblical theological term, the hypocrisy of the world. It breaks my heart to see refugees in Ukraine. It really does, because we know this as Palestinians. We know what it means. We know what it means to live under bombshells, and we know what it means to live in fear of losing your home. When we hear about sanctions about Russia, all Palestinians think, what? I mean, Israel has been doing this for so long and nobody moved. Russia is banned from FIFA, is banned from flying and trades, and we say, are we less humans as Palestinians? Why doesn't anybody care about our ongoing suffering? And again, don't get me wrong, you know, we need to do whatever we can to stop the war in Ukraine. As I said, it breaks my heart to see lives lost, homes destroyed, and people become refugees. But I can't hide my frustration about the hypocrisy of the world. And you know, watching how the media covers this, and they've been blatant. You know, we were not used to seeing refugees who are white and from Europe, and you know, it's okay if they are from the Middle East, but no, they're, you know, some people are saying it in straightforward language. So it's a season of lament, and I hope that in this season, and by joining this series, I hope that we all use it to cry to God in lament. And you might be surprised, you came for a series called Cry for Hope, yet the first session began about lament. But as I often say, and I've written about this, there is no hope without lament. Lament is the first step towards hope. Lament is what moves us to change things. People who are troubled by the injustice of the world, people who are, you know, anguished and angry, talking about holy anger about the injustice, and people who are lamenting are moved to act and change things. And let's not forget that the season of lament ends in Easter and in Resurrection Sunday, in the beginning of a new life, in the dawn of hope. But there is no Easter Sunday, not just before Good Friday, but before we really lament and are broken by the things that I believe do truly break God's heart. So I invite you in the beginning of this season and in the season of Lent to lament with me the ongoing Nakba of Palestinians, the silence of the world, the silence of the church, the role of our theology, and the hypocrisy of our world. And may our lament leads us to act and leads us to continue to hope for a new life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Munther. That's a wonderful start for our series, and just so many things to reflect on now. I'm sure you're going to get lots of questions. So bear with us whilst we come to David, Reverend David Haslam, and he's going to offer us a few more thoughts in the closing 15 minutes.
Thank you, Charlotte, and thank you everyone for coming this evening. From a UK perspective, I believe the cry for hope was written because we need to hear it, because we need to acknowledge our responsibility in the situation in Israel-Palestine today, because we need to lament and repent. We need to repent in the theological sense that the full meaning of metanoia, facing up to what we've done, the pain it's caused, and the need to turn and travel in a very different direction. And the cry follows, of course, the Kairos Palestine call in 2009, and I believe it was written at least as much for the UK as it was for Palestinians. I fear the response of many in Britain and indeed Europe when challenged with what is going on in Israel-Palestine is, well, it's sad, even shocking, but they've been responsible for themselves for 75 years. The two parties talk to each other. This fails to recognize both the enormous imbalance of power and how asymmetrical the situation is, and also the painful history. The imbalance is shown in 2016. The Obama administration signed up to $38 billion in aid to Israel between 2017 and 2028, about $3 billion a year in military aid mostly. The Palestinians received far less, and in 2028, the Palestinian Authority was actually cut by 85%, including by Arab states. And there's the history. As we learned in South Africa and in Ireland, it plays a crucial role. People do not simply forget the past. There's too great a sense of injustice, too much owed to those who have suffered. And some of that Munther mentioned. In the UK, we have to begin with the Balfour Declaration in 1917, which will be familiar to many, but not to all, perhaps. It ceded the land to the Zionists, those who wished to create an exclusive state of Israel. I'm indebted here to a paper by Reverend Warren Bardsley, which gives a fuller account, but in that 67-word declaration to Lord Rothschild by the British Foreign Secretary Balfour, it says the government views with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for Jewish people, while adding nothing shall be done to prejudice the rights of the non-Jewish communities in Palestine. And these were, of course, the Palestinians who lived there for certainly as long as the Hebrew people, who, according to Exodus, took the land by force some 1500 years BC. So in the name of the British people, Britain, having been given responsibility for Palestine in 1920, the Zionists were promised something which was not in our gift. And this deceit led to distrust. Arab leaders thought British intentions were honourable. They would build in Palestine a country of equal rights, but this was never really intended. And the result was unrest, and the Palestinian revolt between 1936 and 1939 was brutally put down by British forces. Meanwhile, in Europe, the rights of the Nazis had led to another kind of Christian resistance. In 1933, when Hitler took power, some Christians in Germany had their own kind of Kairos awakening, and they produced the Balfour Declaration, creating the confessing church supported by Dietrich Bonhoeffer and others. And there followed the utter horror of the Holocaust, which triggered the mass exodus of Jews, its enormous physical and psychological impact, the large number of survivors who sought safety in Israel, Palestine, the guerrilla war against the British Army by Jewish militias, and the abandonment of our responsibility for Mandate Palestine, handing over the territory in 1947 to this newly formed United Nations. This was described by the Israeli historian Avi Shlaim as the worst blot on Britain's record as a responsible power. The effects of the British Declaration were brought home to me by reading Blood Brothers, this book by Elias Chacour, later to become the Melkite Greek Catholic Archbishop, where he describes as a young child what happened to his family and villages as the Zionists moved in and the British moved out. He tells how his deeply Christian father welcomed the soldiers, fed them, and assured his family all would be well. But the family were driven from the village to live in the wild, and their homes were destroyed. Returning to their makeshift camp next to the next village, almost also deserted, the boys, Elias and others, began playing football in the nearby sandpit. When the ball was kicked to the edge of their pitch, Elias was the one who discovered an arm sticking out of the sand, where some of the previous residents had been buried after a massacre. And there are similar memories for too many Palestinians in the way that we heard earlier. The Arab nations reacted and resisted in 1947-48, a period described by the Zionists, the War of Independence, and the Palestinians as the Nakba, the catastrophe. Some 750,000 Palestinians were forced to flee their homes and to become refugees in and around Palestine, where many of their descendants are still confined, despite the UN's affirmation of their right to return. Over 1 million Arab Palestinians live today within the state of Israel as second-class citizens. Much of the land originally allocated for a Palestinian state in the UN partition plan is now occupied by settlers, numbering nearly 700,000 in 130 different settlements, plus 100 more unofficial ones. So the legacy of Balfour, the consequences of that 67-word letter sent to Lord Rothschild over 100 years ago, is not only one of deceit and distrust, but of ongoing ethnic cleansing. And so the Palestinians lament, and so should we. We in the UK need Cry for Hope, particularly as it draws attention to the urgency of economic action in support of the Palestinian people. It references the World Council of Churches programme to combat racism, in which boycott and divestment from companies involved in propping up apartheid were vital. It reminds us of the importance of creative and non-violent resistance. The 2005 Palestinian call for boycott, divestment and sanctions for BDS provides a framework for economic, cultural and academic resources to end the occupation. The purpose of BDS is to exert pressure on Israel to comply with international law and to take the way of justice and peace. Hence, it becomes vital to examine how the global finance and trade system props up the state of Israel. As with apartheid South Africa, the 1985 Kairos South Africa call intensified BDS action worldwide in that context. How the global system now operates is demonstrated in last September's report, Don't Buy Into Occupation, by 27 human rights and justice organizations based in Israel, Palestine, and Europe. That report investigates the financing of the enterprises involved in developing the illegal Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories. Some of the leading lenders in the UK are UK-based banks like HSBC and Barclays. HSBC is third in the list, lending to some 50 companies profiting from the occupation. And Don't Buy Into Occupation states that loans totaling $114 billion were made to those 50 companies between 2018 and 2021. HSBC has also made a 10-year loan of $10 million direct to the State of Israel. I raised this loan at last year's HSBC online AGM and was fobbed off with, "This bank does not take positions on political issues." Scroll back 50 years, and that's exactly what Midland Bank, which is HSBC's predecessor, said to us when we challenged them on loans to apartheid South Africa. We aim to raise this at this year's National Methodist Conference here in June, and maybe again at HSBC's May AGM, because HSBC also needs to hear the cry for hope. I believe Cry for Hope, following Kairos Palestine 2009, was written to help save the British soul. It was a response of oppressed human communities to their oppression. And whether this comes in words or campaigns, in writings or resistance, non-violent or even violent, it is an expression of their humanity. We will not be ignored. We will not be marginalized. We will not be silenced, much as the Ukrainian people are saying today. The Cry for Hope is that kind of statement. It echoes the cry for hope, the lament of Black South Africans in their Kairos document, in the civil rights movement of Black Americans, which has re-emerged in Black Lives Matter, in the Balfour Declaration by the Confessing Christians of Germany, in the demands of indigenous peoples in Australia, Africa, Latin America, and North America, that we will not be ignored. It's like the cry of blind Bartimaeus to Jesus from the side of the road, "Son of God, have pity, listen to me." And when they tried to shut him up, he cried out all the more, a cry for hope coming from the heart? Are we listening? Will we hear? Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you to Reverend Munther again as well. We're going to be stopping the recording at this point. If you are listening on catch up and you're on our YouTube channel, thank you very much for joining us for this first series of Cry for Hope, and we hope this recording will help you with your group discussion and your questions, and we'll post the next one again next week.